conversation explores the art of thinking beyond the obvious. And today I have my special guest. He's a Marine Corps major, entrepreneur, and a Harvard Business School graduate. And of course, the author of the upcoming book, What If Anger is the Answer? None other than Mr. Mike LeBlanc.
Thanks a lot, Daniel.
Welcome, Mr. Mike on Abstract Essay. Can you please introduce more about yourself that I met?
Yes, no, I appreciate it. Happy to be here. My day job is making humanoid robots that we use in all variety of tasks. We call it auto manufacturing, but also we sell them into the Defense Department. So, I was a Marine for 14 years, so leveraged a lot of that experience. I had another company called Cobalt Robotics, where we made robots that replace security guards, and so now have merged those together, and that's what we run. But my real passion here is What If Anger is the Answer, and this is a book that I've worked on for a very long time. It compiles a lot of the lessons that I think really separates people that have joined the military, of answering the question, what makes people different after they join the military? I think that's a universal experience people have when they come back from even boot camp, is that people say, you've changed. This book tries to go into how they change, and to try to help civilians who haven't gone through that experience maybe do a little work on themselves.
Yes, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. Mr. Mike, thank you for sharing this book to the world. What if anger is the answer? Lies the face of everything we thought. What anger is dangerous that we should suppress it, or that is the enemy of good decision making? What happened to you in a combat, in relationship, in building companies that made you question the conventional wisdom and wonder if we have been wrong about anger all along?
Yeah, well, really, this began for me when I was studying Aristotle and Plato. And I'd grown up always knowing that anger was not the answer to anything, right? You watch Jerry Springer, you watch daytime television, you think, no, these sorts of passions are what lower us, they debase us. But as I read Aristotle, Aristotle said that anger was a virtue. And he said, you could be too angry at something like you are during road rage, or you might not be angry enough, right? If a bear comes and mauls your family, you're not supposed to sit back detached and go, oh, that's interesting. That bear is really eating my family, right? You're supposed to get angry at these kinds of things. And that really started this sort of mystery for me of trying to figure out why would they have in ancient Greece anger so at the center of goodness. And that mystery got even deeper for me with Plato. In the Republic, there's a very famous part where Socrates talks about the soul, and he says that the soul is in essentially three parts. There's the mind, which he represents with a small man. There are the appetites, of wanting, food, sex, drugs, drinks, all these things, that he represented with a hydra, a many-headed beast, where every time you cut off a head, two grow back in its place. But there was a third part that was for anger, and that he represented with a lion. And that always was such a puzzle to me of why he had that third part. We all know from cartoons, there's the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other, and we've all become very used to the angel says it's probably time for us to turn in, and the devil says the night is young, it's time to go out and party. But Aristotle had this third part, and so it was really trying to dissect what is that third part. Why does he have anger, and why does he cast it as this noble character, as a lion? And I think that as I went through Marine training, the Marine Corps has really good answers to helping me understand what that third part was.
Mr. Mike, what did the Greek understand about anger that we've forgotten, and what does it mean to educate anger rather than simply suppress or release it?
Yeah, well, I started to realize that it's really anger with yourself is, I think, the easiest way to understand what was good about anger. Aristotle also says that shame is almost a virtue. He says you can't call it a virtue because a virtuous person wouldn't be ashamed of anything. But if if you could have something negative, shame would be the thing that really shows us that. And I think that's what we started to see in the Marine Corps. Anybody that goes through boot camp, and everybody's watched Full Metal Jacket or whatever movie has cast this, but it sort of pulls out everything that you have to hide. And the civilian world makes it very easy to hide who you are as you get older. Anything that you're ashamed of, if you are an overeater, if you're worse, right? These things become very easy to hide from all of your friends. They're things that you can do in the privacy of your own home that you never share with anybody. The problem with that is that those shameful activities, they really fester in your soul. They start to dictate a bit of who you are, and everybody has these things. But there was a General Mattis had a great thing that he would always say to the Marines when he would come out to us, that he said, if you'd be ashamed to do something in front of somebody else, you should probably be ashamed of doing it when you're on your own too. And I think that's what the Marine Corps is really great at. You go into boot camp and suddenly you have this drill instructor that is just screaming at you about any of these things where you sort of step out of line, anything that you would be embarrassed about. They call it all forward. And it's up to you to either fix that or to own it. And I think that's what makes for very, very interesting men and women that come through that process.
Mr. Mike, your subtitle uses the word shaping aggression. That's a deliberate choice. You're not advocating for letting anger run wild or not for bottling it up. What does the process of shaping actually look like?
Yeah, well, the interesting thing to see is I think that adults, we all go through this process where as children we've believed in big things and we've been naive about what the world looks like. And we all develop this sort of cynicism of starting to say, okay, none of this is the way that I thought it was. And, that becoming famous, it's all just nepotism. And, all just running companies is all because your parents knew somebody, right? You start to see through all of these things and people become very, very cynical and they call that, being realistic about everything. I think that when you really shape this aggression, when you shape that view of yourself, of others, and start to say, yes, I am angry at myself for these negative things. I'm angry at the world for cheating me and for lying on these sorts of things. There's still a next step to get to, and it's something that I think about as a grounded idealism. It's still being able to recognize that we do have heroes, we do have nobility, we do have beautiful things in the world, and there's a realistic way to look at all of those. And so I think that's the important process that goes through as somebody starts to encounter this journey of really just being honest with themselves and being willing to be angry with themselves, being willing to be angry with the world. There's another side to that, and that's what I hope to get through the book.
You spent 13 years in the Marines, deployed three times in the Middle East, led 150 troops against ISIS. Is in that crucible, how do you see anger function in yourself and your troops? When did it save lives or when did it endanger them?
Well, my dad always had a saying: you have to run you before you can run a crew. And so he thought you have to really get yourself right before you can actually lead others. And that's what I saw time and time again throughout the Marine Corps. Was I would be given all these young Marines, in some cases Marines that were older than I was with more experience than I was, but I outranked them. Uh, and you'd really be meeting each of them and seeing, man, they've got some problems and they've got some great parts of them. But if I was going to lead them, if I was going to be able to set the standard, if I was going to set the example on what they could do, and even just have the authority to to task them with anything, first I needed to get myself in order. And I think that at a young age, that's for a lot of Marine lieutenants. You'll get your first platoon at age 21, age 22, something like that. It's a really interesting position to put you in, where you realize I can't be sleeping in, I can't be missing deadlines, I can't be overeating, I can't do any of these small shames that you would have through high school and college that are often funny to friends. You need to have all of those in order. You're expected to be a professional. And I think that was kind of the first thrust in all of these things in being able to actually set a standard for people is living up to that standard yourself.
Mm, interesting. Mr. Mike, was there a specific moment in combat, a firefight, or a decision, a loss, where you realized raw anger was insufficient and what something more refined was required?
Well, so I was an advisor to the Afghans during my first deployment, and that involved teaching them how to do patrols, teaching them how to look for Taliban and conduct all of these missions. But the big threat against everyone was the green on blue attacks, and this is where one of the Afghan soldiers would attack one of the American advisors. It was at the time it was a great method for the Taliban to attack us because it really went at the central trust between the Afghans and the Americans. And my team was attacked within our first month in Afghanistan. We had one of the soldiers that we lived with on their base. He climbed up into one of the watchtowers with his rifle that he was going on watch and started shooting directly at one of our trucks. And it was just a pickup truck that we would use to get around base, and unloaded his entire magazine into it. Now that was an experience where our entire team wanted to be filled with rage and just so angry at the soldier, so angry at the Afghan army for letting him get in that position, for making us so vulnerable, for not stopping that beforehand. But that anger wasn't going to do anything, right? And it was really insufficient answer to what needed to happen. And what we realized was if you wanted to be protected from the other soldiers, the path was not to wear more armor and carry more guns and chase these guys down. The answer was to build more trust. And the Greeks really would say that this same part that was cast by the lion, that is the anger, that is the part of us that can stand up as a warrior and go fight. That's the same part of us that can form friendships and long-term bonds. And so the tour really became more about how do we create friendships and trust with the Afghans so that if there is going to be another attack, they'll tell us about it or they'll protect us from it and just make it more like less likely in the first place.
A trust indeed. You went from leading Marines against ISIS to building robotics startups backed by Sequoia and Founders Fund. That's not just a career change, it's a different universe. How does the anger you learn to shape in combat translate to the boardroom?
Well, when I left the Marines, I got married and decided that I was going to start a family. I wanted to do that outside of the Marine Corps. And I tried getting a job anywhere that I could in Orange County. I was willing to take any job as long as it paid me $60,000 a year. That was my goal. And if that was a supervisor at Walmart, if that was the janitor at McDonald's, I didn't care. That was my only criteria. And I wasn't able to get a job. I
Hmm.
applied everywhere. I would interview at these places, and I didn't know why for a long time that I wasn't able to figure out a job. But I now see that it was this kind of edge that I developed in the Marines. I always think that throughout the military, we are very good at calling out the emperor when he has no clothes on. And that disagreement, that willingness to disagree, the willingness to stand up against the crowd and to try to make sense of things, that all comes from this same central anger of this shame of having to fess up with ourselves about who we are. And I think that was something for me that really held me back for a long time. I often tell my kids I had to start companies because nobody else would hire me. But there's a bit of truth to that because that's a hard person to hire. People like the person that's going to come in and not question things. They like somebody who's just going to go with the flow and just do what they're told, right? That sort of obedience makes a very good employee. But not often do people want to hire an individual contributor who's going to come in and say, I have no idea why we're doing it this way. That doesn't make any sense. I don't think this is going toward our goals, right? Are we just, spinning our wheels? People don't really like to bring that in. But I think once you start a company and once you find a position where you can speak your mind like that, it's incredible what you can build. And that's very much what I've found in my own life.
Incredible, incredible indeed. You draw on this Marine Corps ethos in your book. How does this principle apply to leadership, to negotiation, to building companies? What does it look like to be the best ally and the worst adversary, depending on what the moment requires?
Yeah, well, I think that ultimately, when you are leading an organization, the central job that you have is judgment of everything, right? You need to be able to judge if an opportunity is worth going after. You need to be able to judge if a threat is worth combating and if it needs to be taken down. And you need to judge all of your employees at all times to see who's producing what. Are do we have them working on the best things, etc. And it's through those million tiny decisions that you make that your organization ends up moving forward or ends up being at a standstill. And so, really, this anger that I want to get at is a recognition of just what's going on. It's being willing to see through whatever the nonsense is, whatever the game is, whatever's rigged. You're able to see through it, but you're still able to build within that. And so I think that's the exercise of leadership, is really looking at all of these tiny decisions that need to be made and being able to look at them clearly at what's actually going on, but then being able to build something out of it. And so that's very much something that, as I developed this anger and this edge throughout the Marine Corps, I think that I got very good at honing that to be able to use in business.
You use Hamlet to illustrate something about revenge, isn't it? What does Hamlet misunderstand about anger and action? And what would you teach him if you could?
Hamlet is so interesting because to a modern audience, Hamlet would look like someone that we would want to run for office. He's
Mm.
he's smart, he's conscientious, he's well studied. Hamlet really enters the play as a great guy, but he's been called back from school into this barbaric revenge play, right? The idea is that his uncle has killed his father and then married his mother. And so you see him sort of just thrown into this old world where the obvious answer would have been kill the uncle. Hamlet's 30 at the time of the play. A lot of times, he gets cast or thought about as a teenager, but he's 30. He's well of age to be able to rule Denmark, but he can't bring himself to actually get angry enough with his uncle to go and kill him. He's not able to bring himself back to that barbarian that he has inside of him. He's not able to bring it out until later in the play. He brings that anger out far too much, and then ends up killing everybody and ends up dying in the process. And so I think in Hamlet you see, a picture of what we see in America a lot today. People keep this pent up, right? They have a politically correct view. They don't want to say what's actually going on. They feel they feel that they are above getting their hands dirty in fixing whatever it is until it just goes too far and you watch so many people snap. And that shows in violent protests, that shows in school shootings, that shows in political violence. You just see these people that have reached their limit. And so the only anger that you ever see is either suppressed or just all out madness and rage. And I think the lesson of Hamlet is to be able to find that middle spot where you can still let that anger help you act, but the action doesn't need to be crazy and bloody.
Mr. Mike, you discuss building strong alliance with untrusted strangers. How does anger or the proper shaping of it helps these situations? How does it allow trust alone cannot?
It's so interesting. I think that I went through a similar arc that almost everybody goes through as they come of age, which is I started out with this part of me that was me against the world. I had a chip on my shoulder. I wanted to prove to everybody just how great I could be, and I planned on doing it by beating everyone else. Right. And in my case, that was in the Marine Corps. But as you go through that, you start to realize, no, not everybody here is an enemy to be overcome. They're not all competition. There are actually a lot of people that would make good allies in this, and you start to form friendships with them, and you start to realize, if I'm going to be number one in any respect, it's only going to be on the shoulders of other people. It's only going to be them helping me up. And you sort of develop this new friends and enemies. It's us against them. It's, and it's our team against the world. But as you do that, if you're going to build something big, you start having all of these strangers that enter your life, right? And so this was very much, I've seen this in each of my companies. You hire a lot of people that are all there for the same mission, and you're all excited, everybody's skills, and you're all working toward the same goal. But to get big, you need to start hiring vendors. You need a supply chain. You need a PR team. You need, customers. You need all of these outside people who don't necessarily share your vision of what the company is, but they're somehow important, even though they're ancillary to it. And some of those strangers are extremely helpful and become friends, but others are really hurting what you're going after. And so if you're going to have a big tent of all of these different strangers, you need to get very good at discerning who all of those people are. And so I think that's one of those key judgments where a lot of people just turn cynical through having to work with the vendors and work with the outsiders. They just start to say, this isn't what I thought. When I was young, I had this naive view that there was a team and it was us against the world. But now I recognize that, nobody really cares about what we're doing. And people fall into this cynical view. But there is another path to really seeing, no, you can still get these people moving in the same direction just enough to be able to reach some important mission. And I think that's what I try to track, is what that looked like as we started to meet the Afghans, as we started to have more police and the Canadians and other militaries that were all there. You had all of these new strangers in, and we still had to figure out, how do we accomplish the mission by getting everyone aligned just enough to move in the direction for a moment.
Mr. Mike, to wrap up our discussion for today, you've led troops in combat, built companies that were acquired, advised the Pentagon, and now written a book. When you look back on all of it, what do you hope this book, this idea about anger, adds to the world? And what one thing you want readers to take with them?
I think that a lot of people start on the same self-examination that I had, when I was in my 20s. And I think a lot of people abandon that process, right? They come to this point where the things that they're ashamed of are easy enough to hide, and the world doesn't seem really worth all of their virtue. And so I really hope that what this book is putting out in the world is, there is an end to that process. If you continue on that self-examination long enough, if you're willing to look hard enough at yourself and to order your own soul, there is something that comes out the other end that is wonderful and beautiful and a great thing to spend your life doing.
Great thing indeed. So, Mr. Mike, can you please invite our listeners to support your upcoming book, your business, or whatever projects that you want to promote?
Yeah, well, very much. What If Anger is the Answer is available for pre-order on Amazon, Target, Barnes & Noble, really wherever you find books, it is posted. And you can learn more about it at MikeJLeBlanc.com.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Mike LeBlanc, because if you support him, for sure, more and more empowering anger will rise. I have one more question, Mr. Mike. You went to Harvard Business School after your military service. What did Harvard teach you about anger that Marines did not?
Oh, well, what it really added was the building portion. I knew that I could use anger to go and accomplish missions where you destroy things. But Harvard Business School is about enterprising and building things. And I think that's where I really started to see that there are two sides of the same coin, in that destruction and building. And that's what I took it to do as I moved into my companies and was able to build billions of dollars of value.
And what did Marines teach you that Harvard never could?
I think that Harvard would have a very hard time pulling out all of the shameful parts of myself, all the parts of myself that I should have been embarrassed about. And the Marine Corps just does a great job pulling those out front and center and forcing you to confront all of those. So it's probably, the military is the only organization I know of that is really able to get that deep and personal with someone to be able to shape them in that way.
Very well said, Mr. Mike, and thank you so much for your time.
Great. Thanks so much, Daniel.
Mordecai people, see you soon. I'm inviting you to please do come over to my book 101 review and let's talk about the writing process of what if anger is the answer. Okay. Mordecai people, see you soon.